let's start thinking about the role of water in one's diet. It's fairly obvious. We need plenty of it. I mean, that's a fairly simple thing to say. Drink plenty of water. Plenty of it. It's a really simple point. I'm sorry to be so base, but that, as a golden rule, is a pretty good one, right? Why? It's important because it delivers healthy cell function. Now, specifically, the water goes to make the cytoplasm, which of course is where the chemical reactions actually occur within the cell, the liquid basis of the cell. Okay, so the only thing I'd add to that is just bear in mind, if we were talking about a muscle cell, we use a slightly different term. I'm not going to test you on this, by the way, if you're doing the quizzing. But a muscle cell has sarcoplasm. That's because sarco means muscle. But notice this word plasm. Plasm, this is fluid-based, and we need this water in our cells. We also form, and this should say plasma, there should be an A there, plasma in the blood. So we've got plasma that's formed in the bloodstream, okay? So, of course, plasma in the blood, this is effectively the vehicle that carries the cells of the blood. We're talking about red blood cells, white blood cells, and also the fragments of blood, fragments of blood cells, platelets. They're carried and suspended in blood plasma, and that is the liquid, watery structure within the blood. It ultimately makes it a liquid. And finally, we can say that a lack of water leads to dehydration. Of course, one of the things that we know that happens is that if we are exercising, we lose water. Now, that happens because we are sweating, but we're also releasing water because we might be respiring or releasing energy aerobically. And of course, one of the products of aerobic respiration is water, so we release that water in that way. But what I want to do first here is I want to take the concept of dehydration. Let's imagine that you have been, I don't know, maybe it's a sports day at your school. Let's imagine you're in a PE lesson and you do a whole bunch of work in your hockey class or athletics class or your sports day, and you sweat and so on, and you lose a lot of fluid. What is the likely impact of that loss of fluid, and why is it so important that you should rehydrate during those experiences? The first one is that you will experience fatigue. And another really nice term that you can use here is lethargy. Lethargy means tiredness, drowsiness. When we have a lack of water, we feel slower and cumbersome. You've probably experienced this in lots of times in your life. Secondly, we might experience a lack of concentration. So let's imagine that the example we're using is someone who's playing for their school netball team, for argument's sake, and that performer, they play the 60 minutes, and in the last 10 minutes of the final quarter, they start to get more and more tired, okay? And they fatigue, they feel lethargy, they're becoming dehydrated. They're more likely to make mistakes in the end of that sort of last 10 minutes of that performance because they're dehydrated. And that is why one of the issues with dehydration is we are likely to make mistakes in our performance. Now, we also link dehydration to headaches, and I'll tell you from personal experience, I'm someone who I really find it hard to stay hydrated, even through just a normal day. I do a lot of I'm working, I'm at the desk, but I'm quite active, I'm teaching, I'm at the computer, I work with a bit of intensity, and I just find it hard to stay hydrated. I probably drink too much tea and coffee, and it kind of just sort of sucks that water out of me a little bit, and I get headaches sometimes, and the thing that I find solves that most is to drink. So if you find yourself with headaches, especially perhaps post-PE lesson, perhaps post-PE lesson in the summer period, that might be because you're dehydrated, so do look out for that as a possibility. The next sort of impact that dehydration has is it can cause us to feel lightheaded. So I'm going to call this lightheadedness. And I only found out recently that that's all one word. I did not know that, even though I've seemed to have put a bit of a gap into it. But lightheadedness and a bit of sort of dizziness. And the final point, and I want to expand on this one with a little bit of detail, is we also get an increase in blood viscosity. Now you might be thinking, blood what? Blood viscosity. If something is viscous, it is thick and sticky. So if we get an increase in blood viscosity, it's because the blood gets thick and stickier. Now, what did we say before? Water forms plasma in the blood. It makes the blood more liquid. So if we lose fluid in our body, that means that our blood becomes less and less liquid, less and less fluid. It becomes more sort of, it doesn't turn solid, by the way, just to be absolutely clear. But as a result of that, what we're going to find is that the amount of blood leaving the heart goes down. And we call that a decrease, a down arrow in what is referred to as stroke volume. The volume of blood every time the heart beats that's leaving the heart decreases. So imagine we're exercising, right, folks, and maybe you've gone for it. In fact, let's sketch it out. Let's do a little bit of a graph sketch here. I'll come back to my last image in a second. Let's imagine that we've got a graph here. I'm only going to sketch, so it's, let me do it slightly better than that. I'm only going to sketch here, but here's our graph. We've got our x-axis on the bottom, we've got our y-axis going up the side. What we've got here is we've got time, and over here we've got heart rate. So let's imagine that heart rate is in beats per minute, and time, we'll see, we put this in minutes. Okay, so that's what we've got here. So we've got a graph. Now, what we'd expect is that if someone went out on something like a 40-minute training run, we'd anticipate that their heart rate would be at rest. They start running, they find that sort of plateau there, and then at the end of exercise, they drop down. Now, this curve here is for a person who is hydrated. Okay, that's what we'd expect to see. Now, if I use a green curve for someone who is dehydrated, what we're going to find here? Well, we're saying that in essence, their stroke volume, the amount of blood that's leaving the heart per stroke, is decreasing because they're becoming dehydrated. So we'd expect the curve to be the same. And at the point that dehydration starts to kick in, we'd expect them for their heart rate to rise there. Now, if that went up to sort of maximal levels, they would have to drop out and recover earlier, and we get this drift. Okay, this drift, and what we mean by that is because we are dehydrated, our heart rate has to go up. Why? Because the amount of blood leaving our heart per contraction, the stroke, goes down. So someone who's dehydrated, one of the ways you can monitor this is actually just have a sense of what your heart rate is doing. Yes, you could wear a heart rate monitor, but you can also sense this, you can feel this. And therefore, this is an indication. If you're not working any harder, but your heart rate is drifting upwards, this is an indication that you might be dehydrated. Now, I want to finish off with something that's just really practical. I want to give you a couple of tips. Okay, couple of tips. First of all, drink before you're thirsty. Drink before thirsty. That's a really good tip in order to ward off dehydration. I can't stress that one enough. Second tip I'm going to make, and I'll put it down here in blue, is use a urine chart. So we've got the chart here. You can see it already. What we're saying is, especially if we have a wee into a standard sort of toilet rather than boys into, let's say, a urinal, what we want to see is that these sort of shades or hues of urine are fairly healthy. So we consider up here this to be hydrated. Okay, so we've got this kind of hydration here. But as we progress down here, you see that our wee goes very, very dry. Once we're to this point here, sort of orangey yellow, we are already dehydrated. Now, you might have occasionally maybe got up in the morning after a very long sleep in the summer and you find your wee is like this or like this. That is suggestive that you are severely dehydrated and you need to drink water imminently, okay? Now, I'm not suggesting it's really serious or anything. It can become serious, of course, but if you've got very, very dark wee, or if you commonly find your wee is in this kind of area here, you need to be taking on more water per day. And just as a general rule of thumb, you should be taking on at least 2 litres of water per day. And many people drink far more than that. During the summer months, I drink way more than that in terms of water. Anyway, there's our water and dehydration. Thanks.